So I think that's where it becomes hard, paying full attention instead of paying partial attention. Paying partial attention is easy. It just doesn't really result in your best work or your most efficiency or really being present with the people you care about that you're hanging out with.
Thatcher Wine, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Chris. It's good to be here.
How did you arrive at thinking about multitasking and monotasking? What's the journey that's taken you to think about that?
Yeah, so a lot of it came out of my own personal experience. I'm a citizen of the world that we live in, which is super distracting to begin with. Got all this technology constantly asking for our attention, our smartphones, computers, other devices. And then on top of that, I kind of threw in some personal challenges that were of the next level distraction variety. A few years ago, I went through cancer. I had non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. Also an entrepreneur. I've had a business for about 20 years called Juniper Books that is very, creatively broad in what we do with books and very, demanding of a lot of my attention and creativity and productivity. I'm also a parent. I have 2 teenagers. And, I wanted to figure out a way to navigate all the things I was going through, figure it out for myself. And when I figured out, I thought I could share with the world when I learned about multitasking and monotasking.
What was the genesis of that? Was there a point where you were juggling so many things with the family, with the work, with the health? Was there a particular sort of period of time in which everything kind of got a bit much?
Yeah, I got to the point basically between 2016 and 2019 where I hit the wall. Couldn't possibly have been more that I was dealing with at one time. And I was finding it really hard to switch back and forth between what I was going through for my health, for my business, for my family. And, what I decided to do was kind of look back at how I'd done it in the past. So I'm a pretty productive person. And I'm pretty creative and I'm also very ambitious. A lot of things I want to do in life. So I kind of look back, how have I done this before? When have I not felt overwhelmed by it? And, one pattern that I recognized was that when I gave my full attention to one thing at a time, I got things done well. People said, the work is great. And my kids said, we had fun. Like you get the feedback from the world that you're doing a good job and you don't feel so overwhelmed. But then, once I layered on all these other distractions that I was dealing with, it just felt like I always had to be staying up late, getting up early, depriving myself of rest, not exercising, and just taking on more and more and more. And I never felt like I was caught up. So it was definitely in that 3-year period, where I was like, I got to find a better way.
Is there a tension between the amount of work that you can get done and the amount that you focus on single things and the quality of work? Is there a way that all of those are kind of interlinked?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a bunch of research that's been done on multitasking. And the research basically shows that when we multitask, so when we take on more than one thing at a time, usually of the cognitive variety. So like you're doing an email and trying to listen in on a conversation, whether it's in Zoom or something else, we tend to make more mistakes and things take longer. Part of that is due to the fact that we just can't multitask. What we call multitasking is actually task switching. So we're going from one thing to another. We're making it look like we're doing it all at the same time. We like to look busy, right? That's sort of an American trait, especially.
What people mean by what they think they mean by multitasking is parallel processing.
Yeah, parallel processing, or it could be serial processing. And you do one thing, then you do the next thing, then you switch back to the other thing, and back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. The parallel processing might be more like background tasking and primary tasking, where somebody might be listening to this podcast while folding their laundry, right? Most people can do that. But can I have this conversation and also be working on a presentation or a response to a client? No, I can't do it. And I could pretend to do it, but I'd actually be switching back and forth and basically cognitively overloading my brain and causing a lot of stress. Studies have been done that show it takes on average 23 minutes to switch from one kind of cognitive heavy task to another. Because if I tried to go from this conversation to my work, I'd need a little time to figure out where was I? What's this all about? What are my goals? Reviewing it for mistakes and all that. So we don't often give ourselves that break, that 23 minutes. And it causes us to get overwhelmed and stressed out and burnt out, to be honest.
What's the root of multitasking? Is this a perennial human problem? The philosophers of ancient Athens struggling with this as well?
Yeah, I mean, for sure. It's definitely been around for thousands of years. Part of it is and that's an understatement, but it's part of it is the design of the human brain. Like, we're supposed to take in what's happening in our environment, be aware of the dangers. It's a wild animal off in the distance. Like, I got to heighten my awareness and take care of my family. That's an ancient form of multitasking, right? Another one is like, I'm sitting here, but my mind is wandering. So can I bring it back to the present moment through prayer or meditation? Those practices have been around for a very long time. Modern multitasking, I think, dates to like the 1960s when computers were introduced, and we started to think about how they could multitask processes, switching from one application to another. So like the 1980s with Windows, like everybody visualized it at their desktop computer. Oh, I can go from Excel to Word, and my computer can run both applications at the same time. Well, if humans designed those computer programs, why can't we do the same thing? Why can't we teach ourselves to multitask? And then a lot of like employers started, kind of asking, can you multitask? Like, we'd love to have you on the team, and we're going to throw all this stuff at you. And then it became kind of glorified. And a lot of people brag about their ability to multitask. But it's not actually good for us, and it's not something we're particularly good at.
Why is it not good for us? I understand why it's not something that we're good at.
Yeah, so it causes like a physical and mental strain on our bodies that we're just not designed for. So I mentioned the 23-minute statistic a few minutes ago. So when we don't give ourselves the time to switch from one thing to another, we get stressed out. We feel overwhelmed. We can't quite put our finger on it. But there's a real bottleneck in our cognitive ability. So like, you'll have people these days, I hear a lot, like, I don't enjoy my hobbies anymore. I used to enjoy reading. I used to enjoy biking. But, the fact that we always bring our phones with us everywhere, and a lot of people do something like make a call, scroll through social media, it creates a multitasking bottleneck in our brains. So we can't like have that feeling that we used to have of being in the present moment, enjoying what we used to enjoy right now, right here, and with the people we're with.
Yeah, it really does feel like we're not immersed in experiences as much. I critique myself all day about this. I'm in a taxi journey. Good example. I was in a taxi journey to go for dinner last night, and I'm sat in the taxi and I'm driving through South Congress. South Austin's really nice. Got downtown coming toward me. I can see the Capitol building sort of through the dark front windscreen next to the Uber driver. And I was thinking, this is really, really nice. And I was just watching. But I had to consciously think about not picking up my phone to check if, maybe there's an email that I can get to right now, which is going to make tomorrow a little bit easier because I want to have that email to do. But even though I decided not to task switch, the ambient sort of parallel processing world or multitasking world, even the thought of that took me out of the present moment and being immersed in it as well. Yeah. So, there's gradations of how distracted you can be when you're doing stuff. But I really, really value that memory. Thinking back about last night and seeing the Capitol building coming in, and it's cool, and there aren't so many skyscrapers in Newcastle where I'm from, so it's a different sort of view for me to see. And I really value that. But it's so easy to avoid it. Have you thought, I'm going to guess that you must have realized that boredom plays a pretty big role here, that a lot of the time what people are doing with multitasking is probably sedating themselves from the boredom of one thing with another thing.
100%. Yeah. So, what was going on in that car ride, is that we've trained ourselves, or we've been trained by technology and our devices, and just by the fast-paced modern world we live in, that we never have to be bored. As soon as anybody gets bored these days, like, our tendency is to reach for our phone. As soon as we feel like, I've got whatever I'm doing right now down, I'm going to layer something else on. So it's just a habit, and we have to go easy on ourselves. That like, it's not our fault that we're reaching for our phone. Like, there's billions of dollars and lots of people on the other side of that convincing us that that's what we should do. The book, the 12 monotasks that I wrote, there's a chapter in there called Getting There. And it's all about, how to pay attention to the journey, whether that's your commute or you're in a new city or you're, going on a trip and seeing something new, and just sit with the fact that, look out the window, pay attention to the things you've never seen before, or something, if you've taken this ride 1,000 times, maybe you will notice something new, or maybe you'll just monotask your boredom and be okay with that. And then not reach for your phone so quickly in the future. There's also this big impulse to be oh, that's really cool, I have to take a picture. And it's no, you were there. It's okay. The experience was great. You remember it. You had that feeling. And just the act of even thinking about taking a picture and layering on something else, can really take us out of that moment and that feeling of happiness and joy of being where we are.
What technology's done, and not to lay all of the problems of multitasking at the feet of technology, right? This is, as it seems, a perennial desire for humans to constantly rid themselves of boredom by any means necessary. But it's driven the price of removing boredom essentially down to zero. It's made it frictionless for us to be able to get rid of that at any time. So at the slightest sign of discomfort, what we do is we then escape that. We're waiting in line somewhere, we're on a journey somewhere. And for the people, pretty much everyone has some form of productive work that they can do on their phone, even if that's just answering personal emails or swiping stuff as unread. So you can always, there's a kernel of truth in it, right? That, well, this is productive. This is me being useful. And this journey is going to happen anyway. I'm going to town. I might as well use it for something useful. What is it about monotasking that makes it so hard then? Because when you think about it, it sounds like it would take more effort to do two things at once instead of one. And usually the human system's pretty good at finding ways to be lazy. So it's kind of counterintuitive that monotasking is difficult.
That's a great observation. And I talk about that a little bit in the book. If it were easy and obvious, it would be a very short book, and I wouldn't have that much to say. But it is really hard. And anybody that's tried to do one thing at a time instead of multitasking, that. So I think it's really simple. That's one of the greatest compliments I get. It's this is so simple yet powerful. It should be simple. We should just be able to decide hey, I'm doing 5 things at once. I'm going to pick one. I'm going to do it with my full attention. And I'm going to move on to number 2. The reality is that multitasking has become very pleasurable in some respects. You think about media multitasking, you sit on the couch with your phone, you're texting, you're watching Netflix, you've got your computer on, maybe occasionally popping in and checking an email. I think everybody can relate to that. You just relax and you're not really getting much done. You're not paying full attention to anything. So I think that's where it becomes hard. Paying full attention instead of paying partial attention. Paying partial attention is easy. It just doesn't really result in your best work or your most efficiency or really being present with the people you care about that you're hanging out with. So I think it's pleasurable. I think it's habitual, so everything in the world is just glorified multitasking culture. Made you think you can do it and you're going to be celebrated if you do it. And here are some, celebrities and famous people that do it on, run their fashion empire in between, playing tennis matches or whatever. So it's hard. And I think once you do the work and you get more accustomed to the feeling of what it feels like to do one thing at a time, and you recognize hey, this isn't something I've felt in a while, then that becomes more rewarding than the multitasking. Then you start to recognize what you recognized in the car, hey, I'm not paying full attention here and I'm not enjoying this really cool view. What if I could do that? And then you do it, and then you start to make more of those moments in your life. The more practice you do it, the better at it you become.
I think that very much the best work that we do is when we're focused on a single thing. And beyond the fact that we can't really multitask, and it's making our work take longer, and it's not as psychologically fulfilling, I think the main difference that I've noticed with my friends that are able to go sort of hard and deep with one particular task is the level of output in terms of the quality of the work, the level of creativity or ingenuity or just they are able to get to a higher level by focusing on one thing. And the most important thing when you think about what you're competing with everybody else on, very rarely in a job are you competing on the volume of work that you can put out. Like the best pitch that wins a new client over is not the pitch with the most words or the pitch that's been sent the most times or the company that puts the most ideas across. It's usually the company that has the single best idea. The person that gets the job isn't the person with the longest CV. It's the person with the best CV, with the highest caliber of work. And increasingly, you see this in the world of podcasting or YouTube, right? The best YouTubers and podcasters on the planet, they're not the people that put out the most videos. Now, there might be some correlation between consistency of content and how popular they are in the market, but it's not about that. It's about the fact that when you sit down and listen to whoever your favorite podcaster is, you know that that's going to be a really, really high quality podcast. So you don't care about the fact that someone could live stream their life 24 hours a day, but if it's not good, it doesn't matter. And it's going to be beaten by the guy that does one amazing hour of work per week because he's fully focused on it. So I think that there needs to be an understanding, a sort of a cultural change so that people realize that you genuinely aren't competing with other people based on the volume of work that you put out. You're competing with it based on the quality of the work that you put out.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of fear that, if I'm not creating this huge volume of work and making it and telling people about all the things I'm doing and all the side hustles I have and all, the accomplishments, like that I'm somehow failing. But you're absolutely right. It's about quality, not quantity. Almost all success in life. And that comes from, I reference in the book Cal Newport and deep work. Like you have to focus, when you get into the space of deep work, and you learn how you do your best deep work, then you can do it. And you can do it more often and you can be more successful and you can take on a lot of things in life. So I have a business, I'm a parent, written a couple books, it's a lot of output. The only way I can do it is by doing one thing at a time. I can't write a new book while I'm, talking to a customer on the phone. But I can do both in life. And I don't think that people should, scale back their expectations of what they do. I think they should just do them one at a time. And I think there's a lot of fear, at the beginning when people are so used to multitasking, it's like, I can't slow down. Then I won't be as productive. And what if I slow down and then I can't get back up to speed if I want to? So there's making any habitual change like that, it takes some courage to take the first step, give it a try, and then realize, oh, I'm actually going to get more done. I'm going to do better quality work. I'm going to be more connected. And I'm going to be better at everything in life. I'm going to be a better listener. And that's not just going to help me get the customer, but have a better relationship with a partner.
How did cancer change your view on this stuff?
Yeah, cancer changed everything in my life. I was a healthy person beforehand, very active, and then discovered I had 3 tumors in my chest and had to go through pretty intensive chemo, about 100 hours a week, times 6 rounds. So it was pretty grueling. And what I didn't know is that was just going to be the beginning. When I went through chemo, everybody was like, oh, chemo's so hard. You're going to be sick. You're going to be weak. You're going to lose weight. You're not going to want to eat. Nobody really told me how long it was going to take to recover from it and get my energy back. But it took close to 4 years. And part of that was because I pushed myself too hard while I was going through treatment to keep up with work, try to, ride my bike. Afterwards, I tried to keep up appearances. I was the really hardworking, creative, optimistic guy. And I was I feel like crap. And I didn't want people to know that. And I was I just get a good night's sleep. If I just take a day off, if I just get this work done, maybe I'll feel better. And nothing worked. And it really just took a lot of time, a lot of micro adjustments. And so I think it gave me this perspective that what if I never get back to my full strength? What if I have to slow down? What if I can't pretend, what if I can't fake it till I make it? And so I made a lot of adjustments, in my mindset, in my diet, in my daily routine. and the like where I gave my attention, because like that was the one thing, even though my body didn't feel good, um, and even though I was exhausted, like I could give my attention to things and choose where to apply that, and knowing that it was kind of precious and limited. Um, I decided to like really become a keen observer about my attention, my focus, distractions in the world, and try to manage them a little bit better in order to get more done.
It's wild that 600 hours of chemotherapy still wasn't enough to slow down your desire to multitask in the first place.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, that's a good observation. Everybody said, like, slow down, take care of yourself. You'll have time to do, whatever you're trying to do on your laptop at the infusion center later. But no, I didn't listen, because I think I thought, like, I did a lot of work observing myself, like on the side effects and kind of making those micro adjustments I talked about, like, take aloe vera juice for, my stomach soreness and whatever. Like, I had a million tips and tricks that I'd figured out and learned from other cancer patients and practitioners. But I still didn't want to slow down. Yeah. I mean, and that I could relate to other people in this world, whether they're going through cancer or something else. They're just trying to get their startup off the ground while working a full-time job. Like, it's life. Everybody's going through something, and there's a lesson to be learned in all of it. And I think we just always have to, learn from it and make some adjustments to optimize our happiness and our stress levels, and our performance.
One of the things I've been thinking about recently is a hourglass shaped, or a bottleneck shape, that a lot of journeys and sort of passion projects that then perhaps become businesses, or relationships that then get a little bit more serious, that they tend to follow. So this is complete bro science, so just bear with me. At the beginning, when you do something, it's usually new, the novelty motivates you, it's casual, so there isn't that much pressure. This, let's run this for both relationship and passion project that becomes business, right? All of these things are true for both of those. There's little pressure, there's no sunk cost fallacy, there's no investment, you don't feel like it's part of your identity. People don't really care that much about you doing it. It's just a thing that you're doing for fun. Over time, the level of pressure and scrutiny that you and other people place on you, the amount of investment that you have, the amount of work that you need to do, the amount of tasks and different areas that you need to try and bring together in an effective manner, those start to ramp up. But you haven't got to the stage yet where you've done it for so long that you can either delegate control to somebody else, or kind of operationalize some of the common challenges that you face, so that you become it becomes easier to you. So you go from the wide neck, right? It's easy, casual, less pressure, to the narrowing in the middle section, which is when you've got more pressure, more workload, more tasks to try and do, greater sense of obligation to the people around you and to the people that you work with. But then I do think that out the other side of that, you can actually get yourself to a place, especially in a business, where maybe you've recruited an assistant, and maybe there's a manager now, and maybe you've operationalized stuff, and maybe you've got a social media team in to come and look after stuff, and maybe you've got somebody in that's going to do finance, and someone's going to do marketing, and you don't have to do your own schedule anymore. And it does follow a very odd sort of curve shape. It goes from easy to difficult to easy again. However, what you realize is that the strategy that got you from easy to difficult was putting your nose against the grindstone, was going, right, I'm going to go as hard as possible. I'm going to do everything. I'm going to be across everything. And every business person that's listening knows how difficult it is to let go of control, to delegate, and to relinquish the tasks that you usually do to new people, because you know that they're going to get it wrong at least a little bit more than you do right now. And letting go it makes you terrified. So a lot of the time, you don't ever allow yourself to get out the other side of that hourglass bottleneck to find the easy stuff that's on the other side. In a relationship as well, you're going to have, most disagreements in relationships are going to center around probably 5 things. It's going to be a consistent thing that happens. You choosing to do one thing instead of another. You choosing to not do this thing instead of that. Those are the disagreements that are fundamentally going to happen. So operationalize those as well. But if you don't allow yourself to be able to come up with the solutions to delegate control in a business, or to try and, I guess, break down those challenges in relationships, you just stay in that middle section. So yeah, that's my COD psychology solution for you.
Yeah, no, I love it, and I can totally relate to that. So I've had my business, Juniper Books, for 21 years now, and not to disappoint any, entrepreneurs, people starting up companies, like it never really gets it gets easier and then it gets harder. I mean, I don't know if it's 1 hourglass shape or it's like
Multiple.
multiple,
Yeah.
because I'm going through a lot of that right now. Especially as I'm trying to like work more on promoting monotasking and sharing the message with the world. Like I'm trying to delegate more and more. I have 20 employees. Every one of those people does something now that I used to do for myself. So I've got like 20x, my capability or whatever, which is awesome. Like that's where you want to get to. But then like, I gotta get another like 5% off my plate. Gotta find the right person, gotta train them. But once I get them up to speed, like then I'm gonna help like manage them to build their team. So yeah, so not to disappoint anybody out there that they're gonna be on the easy street at some point. But yeah, you have to work on it and you figure out a lot of things along the way. And I do think it's true, with relationships and our personal life and our hobbies, it's like, yeah, you can learn how to do a new sport and then you can get better at it, and then you have your setbacks and then you work on it again. And it's life. And I think we should be realistic about the learning process and the ups and downs that we're going to encounter. A lot of people like look at a lot of like the stories you read in the press, like, oh, so and so, raised $1 billion, sold their company, whatever. Like
whilst being an endurance racer and building a family and doing all of this other shit.
Yeah. I mean, those are the stories that are great for the press to tell. It's not, what for every one of those, there's, 10,000 other people. And a lot of them like you'll never hear about and they figured it out and they're running their businesses day to day and they have a great life. And like, that's, I think what most of us should aspire to. Yeah.
There's a quote that I saw the other day that says, you want everybody to know your name and nobody to know your face. And I think that kind of just highlights the people that have that huge outlier success, like that outliers by definition, as opposed to the people that just iterate steady away on something that works. So given the fact that you have your book company, plus you're an author, perhaps unsurprisingly, you said that one of the most important monotasks was to read. So what's the advantage of reading, especially given the fact that a lot of people that I know talk about reading, but what they mean is listening to books on Audible. So their consumption of books is actually the same way as you would do a podcast, because maybe they struggle to sit down and focus on a book for a long period of time.
So I've thought a lot about reading because I've been in the book business for so long. And I've thought about like, how do what benefit does it provide us besides just like entertainment or information? So we can get information from an audiobook or podcast. And what I came to the conclusion about is that like reading really helps us build our focus and then we can apply that focus to other parts of our life. And when I looked around at successful people like Bill Gates and Oprah Winfrey and Warren Buffett, like they're big readers. Some of the busiest people in the world are some of the biggest readers. It's like, how do they have time for that? Why do they bother? Like, couldn't they just be going and like starting more companies and making more money? And what I saw is that there's a correlation between, the habits of successful people, their ability to pay attention, and then their ability to be successful in life. And so I think what reading does for us, and I do think it's great, like however you get your books and information is great. That's better than not reading. But I do think there's something special about the printed page. When you hold a book in your hands, it like takes up space and has like a weight to it. You're in one place. Your attention looking at the page is in one place too. And it goes, down one page and then up to the next one. And people like create these spatial maps in their minds of like where they read something, where they were. They may not be aware of this, where certain things happen in the book. You have that feeling like, how far into it am I? Am I about halfway through? Am I near the end? Oh shoot, like I don't want the story to end. Like real readers can relate to that. And I think all that's good for us. And I think it's a feature, not a flaw, that we can't multitask while we're reading. It's one of the true monotasks that I, came up with this idea about monotasking for. It's like you can only read a book while you're reading a book on paper. Audiobooks and Kindles and stuff, like you can multitask. And I think that's a good thing. And I think if we read for a little bit every day, like it strengthens our, what I call our monotasking muscles and our ability to pay attention. And then we can apply that to our work, to our relationships, to our hobbies.
You know what it's like to read a paragraph and then to realize that you've been distracted, and someone could hold a gun to your head and say, tell me what happened in that last paragraph. And you're like, dude, I'm sorry. And your eyes have tracked it all the way. And that's so fascinating, the way that our focus works, the way that we can be doing something kind of passively, and yet our mind can be completely somewhere else. And then you catch yourself having not been where you were, which is such a bizarre sentence to say.
I mean, that's multitasking, right? So yeah, you're pretending to read the book, you're monotasking, but you're thinking, and your brain is somewhere else. So that's multitasking. There's nothing wrong with it. I mean, yeah, you have to go back and reread that paragraph. That's fine. That happens to everybody, even like the strongest, most focused people in the world. But I think just having that awareness that like that's essentially what's happening, with everything else we're doing in life. Like if I was having this conversation and thinking about lunch or something, like it's the same thing. It's not like terrible for us. I might not, be as speaking as clearly as I struggle to find my words. I'm like maybe I am thinking about lunch, but I think it's just like having that awareness, going easier on ourselves, and then saying like, what if I did give my full attention to what I'm doing right now? Either the book, this conversation, the walk that I might go on after this. Like it's different. And I think it's not only good for what we do in the moment, but it like really strengthens our monotasking muscles that have atrophied thanks to technology and a lot of other stuff. And then we can apply them, and then be more successful and have more fun.
What would you advise to people who perhaps are the audiobook connoisseur that I've just mentioned, but are struggling to sit down? They sit down to read a book and they can barely even get through half a page before they want to fidget and move around and then leave it.
Yeah. I mean, I'd say, start where you are, and it's not one thing or the other. So I listen to audiobooks, but I also read a lot of books. So I think like any amount that you could spend reading on paper daily is good for you. Start with 5 minutes. In the book, I talk about 20 minutes as being like an optimal amount. And start with something easy. Reread a book you loved in childhood. I don't care if it's Dr. Seuss. Like start with something on paper. I love to reread like J.D. Salinger and Kurt Vonnegut. I've got a bunch of those books on my shelf behind me. Like they're pretty fast, going, easy reads. Don't start with War and Peace, right? Like or a medical journal or something like that.
Red Rising. I'm telling you, if you need a book to get into, get Pierce Brown. Red Rising is the one.
Yep, we make a special edition set of Red Rising.
No way.
Juniper Books, yeah, and it's one of our most popular offerings. It's
Dude,
great.
he's absolutely crushed it. So I put I'm going to go in a complete segue. I put a tweet out the other day saying I was struggling to find something as good as Pierce Brown's Red Rising or Patrick Rothfuss's The Name of the Wind, and then whatever the Way of Kings, or I think the second one was. And I got a ton of interesting responses. But I think one of the things that I found that's interesting, there's two types of fiction books that I've been really enjoying recently. One of them are unbelievably fast-paced. So something like Red Rising is just like unrelenting. Something happens and then everybody's dead and then everybody's not dead and then there's a spaceship and then, someone takes over a planet. But then if you look at Rothfuss and the way that he writes, it's so slow. It's genuinely pedestrian. You get to know Kvoth, the guy who is the main protagonist in the books. You get to know his daily routine. You get to know his walk to work, like his walk to when he goes to go and play his lute at the local pub that he plays in. You know the color of his room, the shape of his room, and it's so slow and pedestrian, but I really, really enjoyed that. And I wondered, it kind of makes me think about the multitasking versus the monotasking appearing kind of within a narrative. That you've got one book, and I felt, I really, really enjoyed Red Rising, and Piers is going to come on the show once he's finished the next one, which I'm excited about. But there was an extra level of, it was like taking a bath or something, just real luxuriating in the slowness of the narrative when you read The Name of the Wind, and it's so good, it's fantastic.
I mean, at any given time, I've got like 5 different books on my nightstand. I just like, depending on the mood I'm in, like some days you've had a really stressful day, and like you can't take the like really deep literary fiction, like, and you want that page turner, or you might just want like a biography and like read a paragraph before you fall asleep, So I think people don't feel like if you read one thing and it doesn't work for you that like, oh, I can't read. Like, find the thing that works for you. Read like a magazine, you pick up in the airport, and just, that might be what you're feeling that day. I think the other thing that is a good tip that I share is if you love audiobooks and you loved a particular book, pick up the print copy. Like, you'll have that familiarity with it. It'll be in a relatively easy read. You'll still get something new out of it. And it's a good place to start reading on paper.
One of the things, I know that we're talking about print books here, but if you've got a Kindle, like a Paperwhite or whatever, there's an extension for Google Chrome called Send to Kindle, and you press a button, and the web page that you're looking at, let's say it's a blog post or whatever, it'll appear on your Kindle, fully optimized, highlightable, in complete Kindle font where you can adjust everything in the margins and all that stuff. And it just means that it turns your Kindle into an e-reader for the stuff that you see on the internet. So now as I'm going around and people send me articles or whatever during the day, or I've got a summary of Thatcher Wine's the 12 Monotasks book or something, and I think, well, I can press this one button, and then at some point when I decide to open it up, it's all going to be sat there in my library. So that, for me, is a much better way to read articles as well, rather than reading it on Medium on my phone or on Substack on my laptop or something like that. You receive a Substack from someone, press the title on the top, you go to the webpage, press the Send to Kindle, there you go. There's Scott Alexander's new blog post, sat like a book, and it's going to take you maybe 15 minutes. So that's your read the next morning. Sometimes, if you're finding it difficult to get into books, perhaps articles via e-reader might be a good place to look at as well.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting concept. And I think, I wonder if that like creates a mindset shift for you, that you're not just like mindlessly surfing the web. And
it's purposeful.
Yeah, right. So it's like you're reading, it's your information consumption, it's your checking in on, the authors. Whereas, so much of the algorithm driven stuff that we're fed, is just kind of mindless, and it's so hard to stop.
Well, it's the environment that you're in, right? You're sat, the guys, Rob Henderson is able to read full journal articles. My buddy Rob is able to read full journal articles on his phone. I'm like, dude, that is superhuman. Being able to do that. I can't believe that someone could read, a very dry, extended piece of work on the phone, because for me, that environment just isn't conducive to deep focus. And, a laptop's only a little bit better than that. But again, what's the environment that you're in?
Yeah.
You've got Kindle in hand. There's no swiping, there's no bings, there's no bongs. Yeah. And then a paper book is one step further from that.
Well, I mean, everything can be monotask. So like all those little tips and tricks, like, instead of being in this like information overload, I'm on a web browser, I've got these notifications coming in, just being like, I'm going to monotask this journal article or this, whatever Medium piece or the story, like, and give it your full focus. And people have been asking me like, can you monotask social media? And, I think you can. Like, it's super distracting. But when I do it, I basically go in with a purpose. If I'm creating something, I'm either applying the creating monotask that's in my book and just thinking of it as a creative act that I'm putting up a post, or I think of it as playing. Like, I'm just having fun. This is like, a joke. It's a whimsical thing I'm doing. Like, I just want to connect with the world through my humor. And if I'm looking at other people's stuff, like, I'm pretty much just like going to figure out what my friends are doing or what this person said, and then I'm getting out of there. And it's hard. I mean, everything is designed so that you don't do that. So you stay, and an hour later, you're like, what am I doing? Where'd the time go? But I think, you can make that decision, kind of like what you're talking about. It's like, I'm going to reframe it, and I'm going to, use my time wisely to get what works for me.
Reframing the experience and what you tell yourself about it as well. If you do get distracted, this is something that I struggle with. If I spend, an hour accidentally falling down some YouTube rabbit hole, and before I know it, that's an hour of my day gone. And I think, oh, you idiot. You had so much stuff to do. And look, you've just spent the last hour learning about some crypto NFT scam that Jake Paul's going to get sued for, or something that you're never, ever going to use. So I've been working a lot on trying to reframe the stories that I tell myself about my multitasking and monotasking. Did you come across information foraging and the theory of information foraging during your research?
I mean, I don't think I'm specifically familiar with that term, but I can imagine what it is.
It was Sam Harris had a neuroscientist on that was talking about parallel processing and multitasking. And he said that in the same way that squirrels are nut foragers, humans are information foragers. And for pretty much all of our history, the people that had the most information were the ones that had the biggest advantage. And then at some point within the last 100 years of our evolution, it switched from the person that has the most information to the person that's able to discern the information the best and actually stay focused on the most relevant information. So he uses this example. There's a mathematical formula that you can use to look at how many nuts are left in a tree and how far away the next tree is to work out the likelihood of a squirrel leaving that tree to go to the next one, because there's a cost that you need to pay to leave the tree and go to the next tree. But if the number of nuts that are in this tree start to diminish so much that the effort is worth changing. So he applied that to humans and information foraging. And he said that one of the problems we have with social media and technology is that the friction from going from tree to tree has essentially dropped to zero. And this is one of those things where a lot of the time you'll see an article that looks interesting on Twitter, click on it, read the title, read the subheading, click off it, go back to Twitter to find something else. Like, you've just selected an article that you thought to yourself would be interesting to read, and you managed to get through the first paragraph, and then really enough, like, I'll jump to another tree. So yeah, I think being aware of that, being conscious and mindful of that compulsion to go somewhere else is pretty important. And also what you were talking about earlier on, the fact that when you're having a conversation with somebody like this, not being distracted, not trying to think about other things. I think that the prescription for people to try and have a private podcast with one of their friends for, half an hour or an hour per week, talking about something in a rigorous, focused way without distractions, it's so therapeutic, and it makes you such a better conversationalist because you have the skill to be able to care about what the other person says. And you talk about this as well, right? That listening is actually a skill that people can develop and that they can monotask.
Yeah, there's a whole chapter on listening in the book. And one of my tips, I don't know if it's in the book or not, to be honest, but is listen as if you're recording a podcast. Listen like it's uncomfortable. That you're paying so much attention to the other person. They're like, hey, what's going on here? Like, normally you're looking at your phone. What happened? That's what we should do. We don't have to do it in every single conversation, but we should have the skills to do it. Nothing in our adult lives, and maybe nothing in our childhood either these days, like, teaches us how to do that and rewards us for doing that. I mean, yeah, you might have friends that are like, I want to hang out with that guy. He listens. But you're kind of sort of rewarded, like, because I think listening is important to sales and customer service and the success of businesses, like how well you listen to your customers and change your products and your marketing strategy. But nobody talks about it really as listening. And so we don't really measure it. We don't really tell people to develop that skill necessarily. It's super important, especially in relationships. As a parent, there's some things that are said, a lot of things that aren't said. And if you're multitasking, you're not going to hear either. You might hear what's said. You're definitely not going to hear what's not said in between the lines or the words or whatever, if you're just looking at your phone or thinking about something else. So I think it's super rewarding. I think we should do more of it.
What about walking?
So there's a chapter on walking in the book, and that kind of grew out of this idea that we tend to combine our walks with other stuff, whether it's like, I'm walking for exercise, or I'm going to make a phone call, or I'm going to take pictures. Like, what if we just went for a walk? What if we just opened our eyes, looked up instead of down at our phones, and saw new things? I'm looking out the window here. It's like gorgeous Colorado setting, super bright. I look super pale. That's a result. But I should probably get out and get some sunshine. But see things you've never seen before, hear sounds you've never heard before. Like, if you're walking around a city, you might smell some things you never smelled before, and that's okay. Hopefully it's like a bakery or something. But it makes us alive to, absorb all this cool stuff in the world and be grateful for it, to be honest. and practice that ability, like not to reach for our phone. And just be a little bit bored, maybe. I don't think walking is boring personally, but some people might think it is, and they might be like, I better go for a run. But I think just like slowing down, enjoying the walk is very therapeutic.
Yeah, I morning walk is the most important thing that I do as a part of my day. If I get that in, even if it's just 5 minutes, the rest of the day is usually like noticeably better, as opposed to the days when I've woken up too late or I've got too much to do and I can't fit it in. Even with that, though, I find myself, I've been tempted to do diction, pronunciation exercises while I walk, or I'm going to spend the entire walk thinking of all different things that I'm grateful for. So set myself a challenge. And that is still, I'm finding a way to, I've left my phone, don't take my phone out on a morning, but I've still managed to find a way to multitask a walk, which is specifically there to be this lovely oasis of calm first thing in the morning. And then there's me doing sinful Caesar sipped his snifter, seized his knees and sneezed first thing in the morning as I'm walking around scaring all of the dogs and cats. Yeah.
I mean, I mentioned the 23-minute statistic earlier about like switching from one task to another and how long it takes to prepare, to get into the next task. So one way I think about walk sometimes is like, if you're going to lose that 23 minutes anyway, if you're going to be sitting at your desk and you're like, okay, what do I have to do? How do I get into the mind space for that? Like maybe you should just go for a walk and use that as your reset time. 23 minutes. It's like, if you're going to lose it, get up, do something, clear your head. And it's actually, I don't think it's that you should never multitask on the walks. You can use them purposefully, like what you're doing, because that you could argue like the thing that you're doing in the foreground is actually your exercise, and the background is just your walking. So I think it's good to combine, kind of like you're reading. It's like combine different types of walks. Have one where you're like doing nothing but paying attention to like the ground underneath your feet. Another one, maybe you decide like, I'm going to like think of a new idea for this project. And then other ones, like you'll go out, just planning to clear your head. And then you're like, the most creative idea will pop into your mind. Because you decided to do nothing. And if you had decided to do something, like it wouldn't have showed up. And I think that's a really cool experience, especially for creatives and entrepreneurs. Yeah.
That highlights the difference between walking and reading, right? That with reading, it's always a front brain task. You can't do something else whilst you read. Whereas with walking, it's automated. Same thing goes for driving. You've got a part in there about getting there, right? Commutes and journeys and trips and stuff. Most people that are competent drivers are able to do something else mentally whilst they're navigating traffic with their hands and feet. So that means that there are different ways, I think, to probably look at monotasking and multitasking. I would probably classify being on a Zoom call whilst writing an email as a different sort of multitask to being in a car whilst thinking about something for work, or being on a walk whilst listening to a podcast. If there's something that you can outsource to system 2, meanwhile, system 1 is to system 1. Meanwhile, system 2 is actually active doing something else. I think that's quite different.
Yeah, and I think we like just having the self-awareness to think about those things as being different and not lumping them all together. Like, oh, I have to multitask all the time, otherwise I'll never get anything done. Or I can't monotask, or I can only monotask. Like, there are different subtleties within it, like you were just talking about. There's the background tasking and primary tasking, the driving, making a phone call, laundry, podcast. And then there's like the cognitive heavy tasks. And if you can learn, what you can and you can't do, then you can make better decisions about what stresses you out, what makes you productive, what makes you happy, what makes you connected. You can decide like, I better not even take my phone out while I'm out on a date, because I know that like my brain's going to look at it and I'm going to be distracted and she's not going to want to go out again. So I think it can be really helpful in all situations.
What about learning and teaching?
So those are 2 chapters in the book, and to a certain extent, they're 2 sides of the same thing. But I definitely believe in learning, continuous learning throughout our lives. I like have a lot of hobbies, and I'm trying to find more time to add additional ones, learn new instruments, and take up new sports and all that. And I think having like a beginner's mind, if you're familiar with that, like it's a Buddhist term about like I'm not a know-it-all about anything, even stuff I've been doing for 21 years. There's always something to learn, and opening yourself up to the possibility, and then monotasking the learning, right? So saying like, I'm learning right now. Like I'm learning how to, talk about monotasking more better. I'm learning about, how to manage my time, whatever. And then, make those self-observations that we've talked about throughout the podcast, like, and then apply the lessons. Don't feel like you have to do what everybody else does. Don't feel like you have to learn how they learn, or do what they do. Find what works for you. And the other side of it is teaching. Like the teaching chapter, people shouldn't skip it because they're like, oh, I'm not a professional teacher. I don't, stand in front of a classroom and teach people. We're all teachers all the time. I might teach my kids something just by them seeing me do it, or a complete stranger might see how I like talk to the waiter in a restaurant. Be like, oh, that's, that was very respectful and empathetic and kind, and then they'll learn from it. So, but on the other hand, like if you really, like somebody asks you, can you teach me how to play that song on guitar? Then I really have to think about, how do I do it? How do I teach it? And it like creates this whole like next level monotasking that like brings your focus to what you know. How can you transmit it to somebody else? How are they receiving it as a learner? Should I make some adjustments? And you can basically, you can develop mastery of things that you didn't know you were an expert in necessarily, but somebody else thought you could teach it. Or maybe your own career, like you can take it to the next level just by thinking about how would I teach this to other people. So it's pretty cool.
What are the most common resistances that people encounter when they're trying to implement monotasking more into their lives?
Some people say it's a luxury, like it's a privilege. Like I don't have time. I have bills to pay. I have too much to do. Maybe when I'm retired, I'll be able to do that. And I think that we get in our own way. I think there's a present moment every moment, right here, right now, like with the people you're with, doing the thing you're doing, wherever you are. And if you recognize, like, I could either do 2 or 5 things in this moment, or I could do one. And if you do one, like, it's in the present moment. You're not, distracting yourself and diluting yourself and your capabilities. So I think, you give it a try and see if it works for you. So I think there's just like a little bit of that fear of people getting in their own way. That's one of the big ones.
Losing memories and not being able to recall the things that you've done is one of the biggest advantages that I can see of this. I don't know how it works. I'd love to speak to a neuroscientist and find out why it is that when you try and have 2 things in your mind at once, you can barely remember either of them. Mm-hmm. It's not like you remember 50% of a trip if you spent the entire trip obsessing about something for work. You just don't remember any of the trip, and you probably can't remember what you were obsessing about to do with work either. And yeah, especially because I'm out here in Austin and I'm meeting new people and going to new places and stuff, and I'm really, really conscious. Like I want to remember this. And it's cool. Mm-hmm. It's the first time that I've been in another country for an extended period of time. I want to be able to look back and really enjoy the memories that I've created. And yet it's antithetical to the way that I spent most of the last 10 or 15 years of my life, trying to run a business, trying to be on WhatsApp whilst taking calls, whilst thinking about 2 or 3 or 4 other things all at the same time. So yeah, I think the quality of life change that you're going to have from monotasking would probably be worth it on its own. But then when you think about the increase in the quality of your output that you're going to have, the down regulation in terms of stress, all that stuff. Yeah, man. I mean, it really is, I think, the perennial sort of modern person problem.
Yeah, modern, but yet an ancient problem. Just, a little bit more information.
Weaponized with technology.
Yeah. But I was at an event recently and, just having a side conversation with somebody, and I introduced myself and said, hi, my name is Thatcher. And he got, I want to remember that. And he got out a notebook and he wrote down my name. And I was like, come on, my name's like memorable, right? It's not like John or something. But I was like, that's a great hack, tip that he figured out for himself. Like he brings himself into the present moment. This person's name is Thatcher. I don't know if he made a note about what I looked like or something. It's monotasking. Like everybody else is like, oh, hey, yeah. And then you forget what their name is. maybe because you were thinking about something else, maybe you're just bad with names. It doesn't really matter. But like, if you can find what works for you, whether it's to record those memories, or something else, and let's just like fully pay attention, everything's better.
I would say, I realized this as well, that I had an aversion to taking photos for a while. And one of the reasons for that was I'd confused taking photos for posting on social media. You know, it's super cringe if you're out at dinner and somebody decides to try and take 1 million photos of the food, because you know that they're not taking the photo of the food because they want to remember the food. They're doing it because they want to flex on whatever social network about whatever food they're eating or whatever restaurant it is. And that had sort of made me feel a bit ick about recording the stuff that I did. But then Yusef, one of my good buddies, he's an absolute fiend with it. And I very much appreciate, and I'm envious of how many photos he has that capture the things that he's done. And I think that there's maybe a place, it's certainly something that I needed to stress test myself on. The fact that because I didn't like the idea of taking a photo for someone else didn't mean that I shouldn't be taking a photo just for me. And the difference between your man that's written it down in a notepad and said, hey, Thatcher, why don't we take a photo together, and just snapped a photo, I do think that there's probably a way that you can be quite present and quite monotasked whilst taking a photo. However, if it's performative and it's then being done for someone else, I think that that's where I draw the line.
I think that's a great distinction. Yeah. I mean, I think if you're doing it for yourself, because like this is how you're fully present. If you're taking a picture of your food because you're like, you know, I'm going to enjoy it more. I'm going to taste the flavors. I'm going to write about, you know, I want to remember like where on the plate this was positioned before I ate it or something. And then I'm going to tell the story of it later. But I think that like, if you're multitasking it, like if you're just thinking about what it looks like while you're doing anything, it's live concert or food or trip you're on or something, like if you're always thinking like, oh, this would look so cool to people who aren't here, it's one thing. And then if it's like, this will heighten my enjoyment of being in the present moment and my senses and, you know, my connection to these people, then it's a different thing. And I think we can, you know, social media is not great about drawing that distinction, or teaching us anything really. But you know, you can think about it in monotasking and multitasking terms as a way to frame it. Am I monotasking? Am I doing two things, but it's still the same monotask of eating, of walking, of traveling? Or am I doing two things and they're really multitasking because I'm here, but I'm thinking about that social media post that I'm going to create later?
Thatcher Wine, ladies and gentlemen, if you want to check out the book, it will be linked in the show notes below, the 12 monotasks. And if people want to find out more about you, where should they go?
So I have a website. I have two websites, maybe three. Thatcherwine.com, monotasking.tips, and juniperbooks.com if you want to check out Red Rising and some of the other things we talked about.
Awesome. I appreciate you. Cheers, man.
Thanks, Chris. It's a pleasure.
What's happening, people? Thank you very much for tuning in. If you enjoyed that episode, then press here for a selection of the best clips from the podcast over the last few weeks. And don't forget to subscribe. Peace.